I'm sure you've probably noticed the latest influx of Mini-ITX cases that have been making their way around YouTube. Their rise has been largely due to the fact that they've been redesigned to fit full-scale GPUs while still also giving you access to high-end processors so you can get top-of-the-line performance in a system that you can hide away wherever you want it to. But the most important feature to me for Mini-ITX PCs isn't just their small size, but the fact that they can be portable. In fact, I don't know if you know this or not, but this channel was started off of my desire to find a Mini-ITX case that was easy to transport. But as was the issue with the Silverstone Raven case that launched this channel, and is the main concern I have with the current Mini-ITX market, is that either the cases are rectangular boxes that aren't designed to be toted around, or if they are designed with carrying in mind, they're massive cases, for a Mini-ITX system at least. I've been longing for the day that there would be a chassis that would meet both of my needs for a diminutive system, compact and carryable. But the days have grown long, I've grown old, and this YouTube channel is far removed from the days where I was filming in the US waiting to take my PC across the ocean and under the equator to South Africa. And I'm just done waiting. So, with the help of WooWare, BioStar, and Beyond Customs, I set out to build the world's most portable Mini-ITX Ryzen PC. Now, there were a few requirements to make this happen. One, the case needed to be small enough to fit in a suitcase and be tucked away whenever I needed it to be. Two, the case needed to have handles to actually be considered portable in my mind. I didn't want another rectangular box of a computer system. There's already plenty of ITX cases that can fit that requirement. Then number three, the system needed to be able to fit the Mini-ITX motherboard, an AIO water cooler, and a full-length GTX 1080 Ti graphics card. So the full system spec list for this build was the BioStar Racing B350 GTN Mini-ITX motherboard, a Ryzen 5 1600 for the CPU, a Mushkin Reactor 500GB SSD as the drive, two 8GB sticks of G.Skill Trident Z RGB RAM for the memory, a Corsair H100i 240mm AIO for cooling, then the beefy Zotac GTX 1080 Ti Amp Extreme Core Edition, and then finally, to power everything, the Silverstone SFX 450-watt power supply. Okay, I know your criticism right there. 450 watts isn't enough to run a 1080 Ti. You'd be quite mistaken. This system, when running at 100% load on both an overclocked CPU and GPU, pulled a peak of 430 watts from the wall, which means actual system power draw was a few percentage points less than that, making it closer to 415 watts of power consumption, which is only 92% capacity. There's plenty of power left to add a few more fans, drives, etc. It was enough. Don't spam the comments with your insults on my precious Silverstone PSU. I've had this thing since the beginning of the channel. It's the only thing that has survived through that original build, so leave it alone. It is good enough. Anyways, back to the build. We have all of these components and we needed a place to put them. Thankfully, meeting all of the requirements I listed earlier was a plastic container just sitting on my shelf holding my reject PC parts. I will now affectionately refer to this container as Totey. You see, Totey was small enough to fit in my suitcase, had handles, and could fit all of the aforementioned build parts. It was the perfect solution to my years-old problem. So I contacted my good friend Garrett from Beyond Customs to help me out with building this PC, since customizing PCs is what he's built his business on. Now, in order to get Totey to a point where he can hold the PC parts, he had to be mutilated. My rule was that we could hack, chop, Dremel, cut, massacre any part of Totey as long as we kept the handles, because he still needs to be portable at the end of it. Garrett was confident that we could make all of this happen. So we embarked on the adventure of constructing the ultimate portable machine. First up was making sure all of the parts were aligned in the proper places in Totey so that everything would fit. There were a couple of challenges to this process, mainly because Totey has some shape to him. He's gotten a little round on the outside, if you know what I mean. Unfortunately, his round corners made it so that the first set of measuring we did for the I/O shield of the motherboard was too far towards the center and prevented us from installing the GPU adequately. Measure twice and cut once, they say. Well, we measured 4 times and cut 3, so I don't know where that leaves us. Anyways, we measured, dremeled, attempted to fit, realized we screwed up, measured again, dremeled again, measured again, dremeled again, and then moved on to filing the edges to make sure no plastic bits would end up in the electronics. With the motherboard's I/O shield positioned, we can now tap the holes to install the mounting holes for the MOBO. That involved a bit of drilling and then actually tapping the holes to get the correct thread size to screw in the mounting pieces. Next was making sure the GPU could fit. However, because Totey's corners screwed us up previously, the separating strip of plastic we were anticipating to have between the GPU's backplate and the I/O shield, that was gone. But with a hole at the bottom of Totey to allow the GPU's feet to slide in, and a hole at the top to allow the mounting section of the GPU to come through, the Zotac 1080 Ti was as snug as a bug on a rug, and stays firmly in place with just a bit of mounting hardware. But just because the Amp Extreme could fit in Totey doesn't mean that it will actually function. It needs to be able to breathe. We can't have any part of the system thermal throttling due to poor airflow, so it was time to cut open Totey on his side to allow for the GPU to intake clean air from the world around it. So it was time to bust out the Dremel again, cut open a cavity for the Amp Extreme's intake fan, file the edges, rinse and repeat for all three of the GPU's 80mm air pushers. But we know that clean, fresh air also leads to dust accumulating on the PC, so we made sure to top the intake air holes with fan filters to help reduce any dust buildup that might happen. Then it was power supply mounting time. Same deal again here. Dremel out a hole on the bottom to allow it to draw some fresh air in with its fan intake, and then also a cutout on the back of Totey to allow for the power cable to be plugged in. We had to use some longer screws to reach the PSU's mounting holes, again due to Totey's rotundness, but the SFX power supply was firmly installed. With the power supply, motherboard, and graphics card all set up and on their way to fulfilling my PC dreams, it was now time to figure out how cable and AIO management were going to happen. Cable management was the simple part, but we had to make sure the Corsair water cooler was mounted in such a way that its tubings wouldn't interfere with other parts and so that they wouldn't kink. Fortunately, since Totey was long enough to fit a full-length GPU, it's also long enough to have the AIO tubing go along the entire width of the plastic case. But the main challenge of the water cooler wasn't how to get the pump-rad combo to fit, but rather what to do with the fans. Unfortunately, mounting them inside Totey while being the cleanest aesthetic option led to clearance issues with the tubing and other cable management. So we opted to mount them on top of Totey's lid and exhaust all of that Ryzen 5 heat, as well as the heat generated by the rest of the system. So cutting out holes, filing, and then installing the fans on the lid was the process, and then putting some fan grills on top just to prevent anyone from accidentally stabbing their fingers through the fan blades. Safety first, folks. With the radiator mounted, fan secured, and all the other primary components installed, it was time to get to the other pieces. Dropping the Ryzen 5 1600 processor in was simple, then putting in the 2 sticks of Trident Z RAM was also a similarly easy affair. For the Mushkin Reactor SSD, we had to mount it to the side of Totey using double-sided tape, but it's firmly secure there. And voila, the build is done. But with everything set up on the inside, there's no way to jump the pins of the motherboard to start the PC. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we had accidentally cracked Totey's lid during the build process. That, though, allowed us to route a small power button from the motherboard's pins to the external part of the tote, so we could turn it on at will. But now, I know you guys are wondering, or have been shouting at me throughout this video, there is no way that PC can cool itself properly, or the plastic's gonna melt if you try to use the PC, or any other combination of something we may have done wrong, and I'm here to say phooey. Phooey on you. Gaming benchmarks show that Totey is no slouch. At 4K with max settings, Totey manages over 60 FPS in basically every modern title. Whether it be Ghost Recon Wildlands or Ashes of the Singularity, the Zotac 1080 Ti Amp Extreme Core Edition ran at nearly 2 GHz and smashed those frame rates. Similarly, its synthetic benchmark scores are also incredibly high. For temperatures, I was actually quite impressed. Whether in gaming or leaving the rig to mine on both CPU and GPU for 24 hours, the GPU temps never went above 70 degrees Celsius, and the CPU temps never went above 50. The graphics card tended to run a bit hotter on GPU-only tasks, likely due to the fact that the CPU's fans helped to dissipate a lot of the heat from the system overall, but still, again, below that 70-degree threshold. And again, the 450-watt power supply was more than enough to supply the parts, whether in gaming or during overclocking. Totey is a massive success in my eyes. He's discreet, small, portable, and immensely powerful. Everything I've always wanted in a Mini-ITX system, and now I finally have. Obviously, there's a few things that I wish I'd done differently over the course of the build, like having that dividing piece of plastic between the I/O shield and the GPU, and not cracking the lid, but there's hardly much more I'd say I could have done to make this PC perfect. Sleeved cables would have been nice, but Garrett, the sleeving expert, said it would have taken more time and effort than it was worth. Probably be best to upgrade to a modular SFX power supply if I want to do that next time. Although upgradability is definitely there as well, speaking of the power supply. One of the biggest pains in the butts about the Silverstone RVZ01 case that I had, and many full-length GPU ITX cases for that matter, was that it had partitions to help deal with airflow and cable management problems. This made troubleshooting or swapping out parts a painful process. You have to unscrew this part, then that divider, then unplug this, then that. It was always a mission. With Totey, I unhook the sides, take off the top, which, by the way, the AIO tubes and connector cables are just long enough to make this process super simple. Once the lid is off, access to the RAM, CPU socket, GPU, and everything else is unencumbered. If I wanted to upgrade to Ryzen 7, I could. Higher capacity RAM, easy peasy. New Volta GPU, plug and play. Or if I wanted to go with a different ITX motherboard altogether, Totey was built in such a way that it wouldn't require any more effort than a normal desktop build. I can carry this thing around, easily transport it, easily store it on my shelves out of the way inconspicuously, and even swap in and out all of the hardware that I desire. It is everything that I wanted when I started this YouTube channel, and now I finally have it. Which, let me thank you guys first off for watching to make it all possible to have access to the type of hardware to make this build happen. This wouldn't be possible if you guys weren't watching. But also, I want to thank BioStar and Wootware for sponsoring the components to make the build happen. Thanks to BioStar for hooking me up with the Mini-ITX motherboard to base everything off of, and then Wootware for sending over the CPU, RAMs, GPU, SSD, and cooler to complete Totey. Which, if you're looking to build a custom rig in the same vein as mine, or want to build a normal PC, or have experts build one for you, look no further than Wootware. If you're in South Africa, Wootware should be your go-to computer hardware store with tons of great components and a vast selection, exceptional pricing on said parts, and then world-class customer service to make the entire experience seamless from start to finish. If you're in South Africa, be sure to head on over to wootware.co.za to woot up your system. The link will be in the video description. Again, seriously, thank you to everyone who watches these videos, hits that like button, and subscribes. It's been a wild journey to go from my first Mini-ITX build to here. I know a lot of you may not get the appeal of a PC in a plastic box, but for me, it's more than just the actual build, but it was just as equally about the completion of the journey that led me to make my first video here on YouTube. I had searched high and low for help with constructing my Silverstone case computer, and then when I found that there wasn't any useful build guides out there, I decided to fill the gap in the market and make my own. Now, nearly 3 years and an entire continent later, I've managed to achieve the same thoughts. I've pursued making videos regularly because I saw South Africa was limited on tech YouTubers and I wanted to fill that gap in the market. And now again, I wanted a portable, powerful PC, and when there's a limitation, I wanted to fill the gap in my market myself. It's been such a wild ride making all of this happen, and it's because of each and every one of you who's decided to be part of that journey with me up until this point. And if this is your first time seeing one of my videos, I'd appreciate it if you considered subscribing if this is the type of content that earns your subscription. Also, hitting that like button down below if I've earned it is incredibly supportive for us and everything we do around here. Anyways, I'm going to wrap this video up there. I'm Brett with the UF Disciple channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.